was one of those soft, golden evenings when the sky turned orange and the air felt heavy with summer warmth. The streets of Brookdale, a quiet suburb just outside Washington, D.C., were calm as usual. Kids rode bikes down the sidewalks, sprinklers hissed across small green lawns, and the sound of distant laughter mixed with the hum of cars rolling past. Malik Johnson walked along the sidewalk with his gym bag slung over one shoulder. His sneakers tapped the pavement in an easy rhythm. He had just finished basketball practice, sweat still cooling on his skin. His teammates had gone to grab burgers, but Malik decided to walk home first, shower, and meet them later. He liked walking. It cleared his head. He wore a dark hoodie over his practice shirt, not because he was hiding anything, but because the evening breeze had a little bite. His headphones hung around his neck, music playing softly. He was 17, tall, thin, and carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing who he was. To most people, Malik was the kind of teen every parent wished for, respectful, hardworking, and smart. He didn't party, didn't get into trouble, and dreamed of studying engineering. But no matter how well he behaved, his mother always reminded him to be careful. "Keep your hands visible, Malik," she would say. "Be polite. Don't argue. Come home safe." He used to roll his eyes at her lectures thinking she worried too much. But he listened anyway. Because his mother wasn't like most moms, she was a federal agent. Special Agent Renee Johnson worked for the FBI. She'd been on the job for 15 years and carried herself with quiet authority. She was known in her office for staying calm under pressure, for being sharp and fair. But when it came to Malik, her calm sometimes cracked. She knew things he didn't. Things she had seen on body cams, in reports, in cases that made her question everything she thought she understood about justice. At that moment, Renee was still at the office, finishing paperwork under the dim fluorescent lights of her cubicle. She had promised Malik she'd be home by 7. Her phone buzzed with messages from coworkers, but she ignored them, glancing at the photo of Malik taped to her desk, his wide grin. His graduation cap tilted slightly crooked from 8th grade. She smiled to herself, remembering how nervous he'd been that day. How he'd whispered, "Did I make you proud?" "Always," she'd told him. Now as she typed her final report, that same protective warmth filled her chest. She didn't know that a few miles away that warmth was about to twist into fear. Malik turned down a quieter street, one lined with small brick homes and parked cars. A police cruiser sat at the far end of the block, engine running, lights off. He didn't think much of it. He'd seen patrol cars in his neighborhood before. Brookdale wasn't a bad area, but there'd been a few car break-ins recently. As Malik crossed the street, the cruiser slowly rolled forward. He noticed the movement out of the corner of his eye. The window on the driver's side slid down. 2 officers sat inside, a middle-aged man behind the wheel and a younger one in the passenger seat. Their eyes followed him as he walked. Malik felt that familiar tightness in his chest. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but he'd felt this before. That quiet, uneasy feeling that maybe he didn't look like he belonged. He kept walking. The sound of the cruiser grew louder behind him. Then he heard it. The sharp crackle of a police radio followed by a voice calling out, "Hey, you!" "Stop for a second." Malik turned around slowly. The younger officer had stepped out of the car, hand resting casually near his holster. The older one watched from behind the wheel. "Evening, sir," Malik said, trying to sound calm. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked, his tone firm but not yet hostile. "Basketball practice," Malik said. He gestured to his gym bag. "At the community center. Mind showing some ID?" Malik hesitated. He didn't like the question, but he remembered his mother's advice. "Don't argue. Don't move too fast." "Sure," he said. He reached into his pocket carefully, pulling out his wallet. The officer took it, glanced at the card, then looked him over. "We've had a report of someone matching your description breaking into cars in this area," he said. Malik frowned. "I just came from practice. I live 2 blocks away." The officer's expression didn't change. The second one stepped out of the car now, adjusting his belt. Malik could feel both sets of eyes on him. He tried to keep his voice steady. "Is something wrong, officer?" The younger one shrugged. "We're just checking things out." Malik nodded, keeping his hands visible. The air between them felt heavy. He noticed a few curtains shifting in nearby houses. Someone was watching. His phone buzzed in his pocket, his mom calling. He glanced down instinctively, and the older officer's hand twitched toward his holster. Don't reach for anything, he barked. Malik froze. His hands shot up automatically. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. I was just, he stammered. The younger officer stepped closer. Relax, kid, he said, though his tone wasn't reassuring. Just stay still. Malik swallowed hard. Can I call my mom? Not yet, the older one said. We'll decide when. Malik's stomach churned. He wanted to disappear. He wasn't angry yet, just scared. He did everything right, everything his mom told him to do, and still it wasn't enough. Back at the office, Renee gathered her files into a folder and checked her phone. No new text from Malik, that was strange. He usually messaged her after practice. She dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. She frowned, dialing again. Same thing. Her instincts, the ones that had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous cases, whispered that something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Malik stood on the curb as the officers asked him more questions. Where he lived, what he was doing, who he was meeting. He answered each one quietly. The younger one circled him slowly, eyeing his bag. Mind if we take a look inside? The officer asked. Malik hesitated. Do I have to? The man's tone sharpened. You got something to hide? Malik shook his head quickly. No, sir. He handed over the bag. The officer opened it. Inside were sneakers, a towel, a bottle of water, and a few folded clothes. The officer closed it and looked slightly disappointed, like he'd been hoping to find something more. The tension hung between them, silent and raw. Just then, a woman across the street opened her door and stepped outside. She was holding a phone, recording quietly. The officers noticed. The younger one shifted uncomfortably. The older one cleared his throat. All right, son. You can go, Malik blinked. That's it? The man's voice softened just a touch. Yeah, sorry about that. You just matched the description. Malik nodded slowly, picked up his bag, and started walking away. His legs felt heavy. He wanted to run, but he didn't. Not yet. He turned the corner and exhaled, his hands shaking. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Malik. His mother's voice came through, calm but concerned. Why didn't you pick up earlier? He hesitated. Just some cops stopped me, he said quietly. They thought I was someone else. There was a pause on the line. When Renee spoke again, her voice was low and even. Where are you right now? He told her the street name. Go home. Right now. I'll be there in 5 minutes, he didn't argue. He just kept walking. Renee hung up and grabbed her keys. Her mind was already spinning, her training kicking in. She called a colleague in local dispatch, her tone all business. I need a status on any active stops in Brookdale near Lincoln Avenue, she said. The dispatcher hesitated. There's one just cleared. 2 officers questioned a teen on foot, no arrest. Renee's jaw tightened. Was his name Malik Johnson? A pause. Then yes, ma'am, she didn't say another word. She just grabbed her jacket, badge, and car keys and walked out. Her heels clicked hard against the tiled floor, each step sharper than the last. Back on the street, Malik reached his front porch and sat on the steps, his hands still trembling. He stared at the quiet houses, at the fading sunlight that painted the neighborhood gold. Everything looked normal again, but he didn't feel normal. He'd done everything right. And still, for a few minutes, he'd seen what fear really looked like. When his mother's car pulled into the driveway moments later, she stepped out fast, scanning him from head to toe. He was fine, shaken but fine. You okay? She asked, voice low. He nodded. Yeah. She studied his face, reading what he didn't say. She'd seen that look before, on witnesses, on victims, even on agents after rough missions. It was the look of someone who'd just learned how fragile normal could be. She took a deep breath and wrapped an arm around him. You're safe, she said quietly, but inside she wasn't calm. Not at all. Because she knew this wasn't over. The next morning started quietly, but there was a different feeling in the air. The sunlight slipped through the blinds in the kitchen, painting thin golden lines across the table where Malik sat with a bowl of cereal. He stirred it slowly, not really eating, just staring at the milk. His mother watched him from across the counter, pretending to scroll on her phone but really studying his face. He hadn't said much since the night before. When he got home, he'd gone straight to his room, showered, and gone to bed early. Renee had wanted to ask questions, to find out every detail about the stop, but she knew better. Sometimes silence said more than words could. Now, as she sipped her coffee, she spoke softly. Did you sleep? Malik nodded, eyes still down. Yeah, a little. She waited, but he didn't add more. She thought about how he used to talk non-stop when he was younger, about how excited he'd get telling her about practice or school. He wasn't that talkative boy this morning. I'm sorry that happened, she said finally. You didn't deserve that. He looked up then, his eyes tired. You always told me what to do if something like that happened. I did everything right. But it didn't matter, her heart clenched. I know, she whispered. Sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. But you came home safe. That's what matters most to me. He didn't answer, just nodded again and went back to staring at the bowl. She wanted to reach out to make it better, but she knew this was something deeper, something she couldn't just fix with a hug or an apology. At work later that morning, Renee walked into the FBI field office wearing her usual calm expression. But inside, she was far from calm. She'd spent the drive replaying Malik's story over and over in her mind. The image of those officers standing over her son burned behind her eyes. She stopped by her supervisor's office. Morning, he said, looking up from his laptop. You look like you didn't sleep. Didn't, she admitted. Something happened last night. When she told him, his brow furrowed. You want to file something formally? She nodded. Not yet. I want to see the body cam footage first. I can make a few calls, he said. You sure you want to get involved personally? It might get complicated. She looked at him sharply. It got complicated the second they pulled a gun on my son. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. I'll reach out to their department. Meanwhile, Malik sat through his classes like a ghost. His friends noticed he wasn't himself. When one of them asked if he was okay, he just shrugged. Yeah, I'm fine, he said, but the lie felt heavy in his mouth. At lunch, his phone buzzed, a text from his mom. We'll talk later. I'm working on something. He didn't know what that meant, but he trusted her. He always did. By early afternoon, Renee had what she needed. A contact in local law enforcement sent her a link to the footage. She watched it alone in her office, headphones in, eyes fixed on the screen. The first few seconds showed the patrol car driving slowly down the street. Then she saw Malik, her boy, walking, his hoodie up, bag over his shoulder. He looked harmless, calm, ordinary. Her jaw tightened as she watched the officer step out, hand on his weapon. She heard the words, "Stop right there." Then, "You fit the description." When Malik reached for his phone, she saw it, the moment that made her heart stop. The officer's hand went for his gun. The fear in her son's voice when he said, "I'm not doing anything." She had seen hundreds of these videos in her career. But this one wasn't like the others. This one had her son in it. When the clip ended, she sat very still for a long time. The silence in her office felt heavy. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and made a decision. That evening, Malik was home again, lying on the couch watching TV when he heard the front door open. His mom stepped in, looking calm, but her eyes had that sharp focus he recognized, the one she got before she did something serious. "Hey," she said softly. "Turn that off for a minute." He sat up, remote in hand. "What's going on?" She walked over, sat beside him, and took a deep breath. "I watched the video," he swallowed. "The body cam?" She nodded. "Yes, I saw everything." He looked down at his hands. "So what happens now?" "I filed a report," she said. "Internal Affairs will investigate, and I made sure the footage is preserved." He hesitated. "Will it even matter?" She turned to him. "It will. Maybe not the way we want, maybe not right away, but it will matter." He didn't argue. He just nodded again. But she could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe her, not fully. And that hurt more than anything. The next few days moved slowly. Renee balanced her job and her growing frustration. Malik tried to return to normal life, school, basketball, hanging out with friends. But something had changed in him. He jumped when sirens passed. He avoided walking alone at night. Even his coach noticed. "You good, Malik?" he asked one afternoon after practice. Malik forced a smile. "Yeah, coach, just tired," but he wasn't tired, he was worn out. Worn out from thinking about how fast things could go wrong. Renee, meanwhile, got a call from the police department's chief. "Agent Johnson," he said carefully, "we're reviewing the incident. Our officers followed protocol." "Protocol?" she repeated. "Pulling a gun on a kid walking home is protocol?" There was silence on the other end. Then the chief sighed. "We'll look into it further." "I promise," she hung up without replying. She'd heard that line before. Promises didn't mean much when it came to accountability. That night she sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, staring at the footage again. She wasn't just angry, she was heartbroken. She'd joined the FBI to make a difference, to serve justice. But now she couldn't help wondering if the system she worked for had failed her too. Malik came downstairs quietly, holding a bowl of popcorn. "You're still watching that?" he asked. She nodded, trying to understand. He sat across from her. "What's there to understand?" "They thought I was someone else because I look like him." "That's it." She looked at him, her throat tight. "You shouldn't have to think that way." He smiled sadly. "But I do." They sat there in silence for a while, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Then Renee reached across the table and took his hand. "We'll get through this," she said softly. "You and me." He squeezed her hand back. "I know." Even though he said it, she could tell he wasn't sure. And neither was she. The next day, things took a turn. Renee got a call from her supervisor. "The department's sending over the officers for questioning," he said. "They're coming in this afternoon." Her pulse quickened. She wasn't supposed to be part of the interview, but she wanted to be there, not as an agent, but as a mother. When the two officers arrived, they looked uncomfortable. She stood behind the glass, watching as her colleague questioned them. The younger officer kept fidgeting. The older one stared at the table. They claimed they were acting on a report, that Malik had looked suspicious. Renee's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to burst in, to ask if they'd ever thought about how terrified a kid might feel in that moment. But she didn't. She stayed silent, professional, waiting. When the session ended, her colleague walked out and shook his head. "They're sticking to their story, but the footage makes them look bad. This won't go away quietly." She nodded slowly. "Good." That evening, she drove home feeling both exhausted and strangely calm. She'd done what she could for now. Malik was in the backyard shooting hoops when she got back. The sound of the ball hitting the pavement echoed through the quiet street. She stood at the doorway watching him. The way he moved, focused and determined, reminded her that he was still just a kid trying to live his life. When he noticed her, he smiled a little. "You coming out here, Mom?" She laughed softly. "You just beat me." He tossed her the ball anyway. "Try me." She caught it, surprised, and for the first time in days she smiled for real. They played until the sun went down, passing the ball back and forth, no words needed. The air felt lighter, if only for a while. But as the sky darkened, Renee knew the story wasn't over. Something told her this was just the beginning of a fight she didn't ask for, but one she wouldn't back down from. The morning started quietly again, but there was tension that neither of them could shake. Renee drove to work early, leaving her son still half asleep. She kissed his forehead before leaving, whispering, "Be safe, okay?" He nodded without opening his eyes. Those words had become their morning ritual since the incident. At school, he tried to focus on his classes, but his thoughts kept drifting. He didn't want to think about the police or the report his mother had filed. He wanted to focus on basketball tryouts next week, on normal things. But normal didn't feel normal anymore. Every time he saw a patrol car outside the school, his stomach tightened. His friends had stopped asking questions. They could tell he didn't want to talk about it. Instead, they just included him in their conversations about homework, sports, or weekend plans, pretending nothing had changed. But deep down, they all knew something had. At the FBI office, Renee was in a meeting with her supervisor and a few senior agents. The case had now reached internal review. It wasn't her case officially, but everyone knew why she was sitting there. They showed documents, policies, and timelines, all in the same flat tone that drained emotion from reality. To them, it was another report. To her, it was her son's life. As the meeting ended, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a local reporter she knew. The text read, "Agent Johnson, I heard about what happened with your son. Can we talk?" She stared at the message for a while. She didn't want publicity. She wanted accountability, but she also knew that sometimes the truth only came out when the world was watching. Still, she decided to wait. Timing mattered. That afternoon, he walked home like he always did, keeping his headphones in but the volume low. He noticed the same street where the stop had happened a week ago. For a moment, he slowed down. Everything looked the same, the streetlights, the mailboxes, even the parked cars. But he felt something different inside, something colder. He reached home safely and dropped his bag by the door. His mom wasn't back yet. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet. He made himself a sandwich and turned on the TV, flipping through channels without really watching anything. When his phone buzzed, it was his mom again. "On my way." "Don't open the door for anyone." He smiled faintly. She had always been protective, but now it was on another level. Half an hour later, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. But it wasn't the familiar hum of his mom's SUV. It was louder. Different. He peered through the window and froze. It was another police car. 2 officers stepped out. His first instinct was fear. His palms started sweating. But before he could decide what to do, there was a knock on the door. 3 sharp taps. He didn't move. Then came a voice. "Police department." "Is this the Johnson residence?" His heart raced. He hesitated, then called out, "My mom's not home." The voice outside softened. "That's okay, son. We just need to drop off some papers." He didn't open the door. "You can leave them outside," he said firmly. There was silence. Then the sound of footsteps moving away. He peeked through the window again and saw one officer laying an envelope on the porch before they walked back to their car. Seconds later, another car pulled into the driveway, his mom's. Renee stepped out quickly, her eyes sharp as she spotted the police car driving off. She rushed to the porch, picked up the envelope, and called out, "You okay?" He opened the door slowly. "Yeah, I didn't open it. They said it was just papers." She nodded, still tense, and opened the envelope. Inside was an official notice about the investigation. Confirmation that the officers involved were placed on temporary leave during review. Nothing more. No apology, no explanation. Just procedure. Renee took a deep breath and walked inside. He followed her, watching her expression. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means they're being looked at," she said quietly. "It's a start." He leaned against the wall. "Do you think they're sorry?" Her eyes softened. "I don't know. Maybe, but sorry doesn't undo fear." That night she sat at her desk at home typing notes for her report. Her mind kept flashing back to the look on his face that day. The fear, the confusion. It wasn't something any parent should ever have to see. A few days later, she received a call from Internal Affairs. "Agent Johnson, we'll be reviewing the case further. We might need you to come in for a statement," she agreed. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." That night, she told her son. He looked worried. "Are you in trouble?" She smiled faintly. "No, baby. I'm just telling them the truth," he nodded. "You always do." The next morning, she drove to the precinct with a calm face but a storm in her chest. The building felt colder than usual. Inside, she sat across from the panel. 3 people, neutral faces, pens ready. They asked questions about the night, her reaction, and how she got the footage. She answered everything clearly. When they were done, one of them asked, "What outcome are you hoping for?" She paused, then said, "I just want fairness. Not revenge, not sympathy, just fairness. My son deserves to trust the people who wear that uniform." They nodded, scribbled notes, and dismissed her politely. She left the building feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. For once, she'd said everything she needed to say. Back home, her son waited for her. "How'd it go?" She sat beside him on the couch. "It went fine. I said what needed to be said." He smiled slightly. "They probably didn't know what hit them." She chuckled. "Maybe not." For a moment, things felt light again. But deep down, they both knew this was far from over. The world outside didn't change in a day. A week later, the story reached the news. A small local station aired a segment titled, "Teen Mistaken for Suspect, Mother is FBI Agent." They didn't name him, but the details were enough for people to guess. Her phone buzzed all day. Calls, texts, and even emails from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered support. Others gave her advice she didn't ask for. That evening, she came home tired, her phone still buzzing. He sat on the couch watching the same report play on TV. He turned down the volume as she walked in. "I didn't tell anyone," he said quickly. "It just showed up." "I know," she said softly, setting her bag down. "It was bound to come out. Do you think that's bad?" he asked. She looked at him, thinking. "Maybe not. Sometimes truth needs to be seen before it can be fixed." He nodded slowly. "People at school were talking about it. Good things or bad things? Mostly good. Some said I was brave. I didn't feel brave, though," she smiled. "You were." Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, he sat by his bedroom window looking out at the street. It was calm again. Families walking dogs, kids riding bikes, porch lights glowing softly. But he couldn't help watching every car that drove by. He was still alert, still cautious. In her room, Renee stared at a framed picture on her nightstand, the one of him holding a basketball, grinning from ear to ear. That smile had always given her strength. She whispered to herself, "We'll get through this, one day at a time." The next morning, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door again. He froze, but this time when Renee opened it, a woman stood there, not in uniform but holding a small folder. "Agent Johnson?" she asked. "Yes." The woman handed her the folder. "The department wanted to deliver this personally. It's about the internal findings." Renee thanked her and closed the door. Her son stood behind her, watching as she opened the folder. Inside was a letter, official, stamped and brief. The findings confirmed that the officers had violated procedure. They would face disciplinary action and mandatory retraining. Renee let out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. He looked at her, hopeful. "So, that's good, right?" "It's something," she said, her voice soft. "It's not justice, but it's something." He nodded slowly. "Guess that's a start." She reached over, brushed his shoulder lightly and smiled. "You know what? Let's go out. Just the two of us. Dinner, no phones, no news." His smile returned, small but real. "Yeah, I'd like that." They spent the evening at a small diner they used to visit when he was little. They talked about everything except the case, movies, school, basketball, random jokes. For a while it felt like old times again, like the world had paused, just to give them a moment of peace. As they drove home later, the city lights blurred past the windows. He leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed. "Thanks, Mom," he murmured. "For what?" "For fighting for me." She glanced at him, her eyes softening. "Always." When they pulled into their driveway, she turned off the engine and looked at the quiet house. Maybe things weren't fixed. Maybe they never would be completely. But as long as she had her son safe beside her, she knew she'd keep fighting. For him and for every other kid who deserved to feel safe walking home. The days that followed felt strange for both of them. The letter had confirmed that something wrong had happened, but it didn't make the pain go away. It didn't take away the looks he got from people in the neighborhood, or the way his mother's shoulders tensed every time she saw a patrol car. It was progress, but not peace. Renee tried to go back to her normal work routine. Her desk was always piled with files, but this time, every case she touched reminded her of how easily power could be misused. She had spent years believing that justice, though slow, always came through. Now she wasn't so sure. Still, she kept doing her job with the same focus as always. Her work was part of who she was, and she wasn't going to let fear change that. At home, her son spent more time in his room. He said he was studying, but most days he just sat at his desk listening to music and thinking. The world outside didn't feel as friendly as it used to. The same neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. A few kind ones stopped by to say they were sorry for what had happened, but even that felt heavy. He didn't want pity. He wanted normal life back. One afternoon, while he was walking home from school, he heard a voice call his name. It was one of his teachers. "Hey," she said gently. "You doing okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine." She smiled, not quite believing him. "If you ever need to talk, my door's open." He thanked her and kept walking. That small bit of kindness helped more than she probably knew. That night, Renee got a call from her supervisor. "Agent Johnson, the department wants to invite you to participate in a new community program. It's about rebuilding trust between officers and local families." She hesitated. "Is that an order or an invitation?" He chuckled softly. "More of an invitation, but you're the best person for it." She thought about it for a moment. The idea of working with the same kind of officers who had frightened her son made her uneasy. But she also knew she couldn't stand on the sidelines forever. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it." The first meeting was in a small hall downtown. Chairs were arranged in a circle. No podiums or uniforms, just people. There were parents, officers, and a few community leaders. The air was thick with cautious energy. Everyone knew why they were there, but no one wanted to be the first to speak. Then Renee stood up. She didn't introduce herself with her title or rank. She just said, "I'm a mother." That broke the silence. Her words were calm but powerful. She told them how fear doesn't always come from strangers. How sometimes it comes from the very people who are supposed to protect you. She didn't name names or point fingers. She simply told her truth. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Then an officer spoke. "I've been on the force 10 years, he said softly. "And I never thought about it that way. Maybe we do need to see more, listen more." That was the first time she felt a spark of real change. It wasn't enough, but it was something. At home that evening, she told her son about the meeting. "It went better than I expected," she said as she cooked dinner. "Did they listen?" He asked. "Some did. Some didn't. But even one person listening is a start." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a teacher," she laughed. "Maybe I am." In the days that followed, more meetings took place. Slowly, the tone began to shift. People started sharing their own stories, some painful, some hopeful. Renee didn't speak at every session, but when she did, people paid attention. Her voice carried the calm strength of someone who had lived through both sides of the system. Meanwhile, her son started opening up a little more. He went back to basketball practice. The first few times were awkward. Some teammates didn't know what to say, but soon it felt like old times again. When he stepped back onto the court and heard the sound of sneakers on wood, something in him healed a little. After one game, his coach came over. "You've got a lot of heart," the coach said. "Keep using it." He nodded, feeling a bit lighter than before, but not everything was easy. A few people online had found the news story and left rude comments. Some questioned his version of events. Others said his mom was using her position for attention. When he saw them, his stomach twisted. He wanted to reply, but he remembered his mother's advice. Never waste your peace arguing with people who don't want to understand. So he closed the app and put his phone away. One weekend, Renee took him to the city park for a walk. It was sunny and kids were playing everywhere. "You remember when we used to come here all the time?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "You used to race me to the ice cream truck," she laughed. "And I used to win." "You cheated," he said, pretending to be serious. "You always started running before I did." For the first time in a long while, they both laughed freely. It felt good, simple, human, normal. A few weeks later, Renee was asked to speak at a public event for law enforcement awareness. At first, she didn't want to. She wasn't looking for attention or praise, but her supervisor encouraged her. "People need to hear real voices," he said. Not rehearsed speeches, so she agreed. On the day of the event, she stood on stage in a modest auditorium filled with officers, parents, and students. She looked out over the crowd and saw both trust and doubt staring back at her. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I wear a badge," she said, "but before that I'm a mother. My son was stopped by officers who didn't know him, and for a few minutes I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to remind us that fear works both ways. Officers fear danger. Parents fear loss. Somewhere in between, we all lose a little bit of our humanity. We have to find it again." The room stayed silent. Then slowly people began to clap. Not the loud kind of applause that follows a performance, just a quiet, respectful one. The kind that said, "We hear you." After the event, a young officer approached her. "Agent Johnson," he said quietly, "I joined this job to make things better. Hearing you talk made me realize I still can." She thanked him and shook his hand. That moment gave her more hope than she expected. When she came home that night, her son was waiting with 2 takeout boxes. "Thought we could celebrate," he said with a grin. "They showed your speech online." She smiled, amused. "You watched it?" "Yeah, you sounded cool. Like a movie character," she laughed, shaking her head. "I'll take that as a compliment." Later, as they ate, he said softly, "You know, I think I'm starting to understand what you mean when you say, change takes time." She looked at him proudly. "You're growing up, that's what's happening." He smiled, though his eyes showed a trace of sadness. "I just don't want anyone else to go through what we did." "Neither do I," she said. "That's why we keep going." That night, as the house grew quiet, Renee sat by the window watching the street. The same one where everything had happened weeks ago. It was peaceful now, but she knew peace wasn't the absence of noise. It was the effort to keep choosing understanding over anger, day after day. A few days later, she received a letter from her department director thanking her for her contribution to the new training program. They wanted her to help develop more sessions on fairness and bias awareness. She smiled as she read it. It wasn't fame or praise she cared about, it was progress. Little steps, one after another. Her son came home that evening holding a basketball under his arm. "Mom, guess what?" "What?" she asked. They picked me for the team. I made it, her face lit up. I knew you would, he laughed. You sound more excited than me. I am, she said. You deserve this. That evening, they sat together sharing stories about the past few months. It had been hard, yes, but it had also brought them closer. He had learned about strength not from fights or anger, but from calm and courage. She had learned that change could start from a single act of truth. As night settled in, he looked at his mom and said, You think things will really change? She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Not overnight, she said softly. But every time someone listens instead of judging, every time someone chooses fairness instead of fear, we get a little closer. He nodded, taking in her words. Then he smiled. That's good enough for me. Renee smiled back, feeling that same quiet pride she had felt the day she first wore her badge. For the first time in a while, the house felt warm again. Not because the world had fixed itself, but because they had found peace in their part of it. The months passed quietly, and life started to find a new rhythm. The memory of that night still lingered, but it no longer controlled every thought or conversation. Some days were better than others. There were still small moments that brought the past rushing back. A sound, a siren, a sudden light outside. But those moments didn't last as long anymore. Healing had become a daily practice for both of them. Renee's new role in the community program had grown quickly. She spent several evenings each week meeting with officers and community leaders. The meetings weren't always easy. Some officers showed resistance, saying they were tired of being blamed. Some residents were angry and wanted faster change. Renee stayed calm through it all. Her calmness didn't come from indifference. It came from understanding that true change doesn't shout, it listens. She had learned to guide difficult conversations with empathy. She would often start by reminding people that behind every uniform, every badge, every headline, there were human stories, families, fears, hopes, and mistakes. We can't fix what we refuse to face, and she would tell them. Slowly, more people started to listen. Her son, meanwhile, began to find his strength again. Basketball season had started, and he was back on the court every afternoon, running drills and laughing with his teammates. The sound of bouncing balls and sneakers squeaking on the floor brought him peace. It was his escape, a place where no one cared about what had happened, only how hard he played. One Friday evening after practice, his coach pulled him aside. You've come a long way, he said. Not just in the game, but as a person. Keep that up. He nodded, smiling a little. It meant more than the coach probably realized. At home, Renee was sitting at the kitchen table going over notes for an upcoming talk when he walked in. Hey, Mom, he said, dropping his backpack by the door. Guess what? She looked up with a smile. You won again? Not just one. I scored the last shot. He grinned proudly. Everyone cheered. Renee's eyes softened. I'm proud of you, kiddo. He sat down across from her. You know, I was thinking, he said. Maybe you should come to the next game. You haven't seen me play since... He trailed off but didn't need to finish the sentence. She nodded slowly. I'll be there. I promise. The next week the gym was packed with students, parents, and teachers. The smell of popcorn and the buzz of excitement filled the air. Renee sat quietly in the bleachers, her heart beating faster than she expected. When her son ran onto the court, she clapped with the others, her pride glowing in her eyes. Every time he made a move, she couldn't help but smile. He looked free again, and that meant everything. After the game, he ran up to her, still sweaty and smiling. You saw that shot, right? He said breathlessly. I did, she said, laughing, and I might have screamed louder than anyone. He laughed, shaking his head. I believe that. That night, as they drove home, the streets were quiet. Renee glanced at her son and said softly, You played like yourself again. He smiled. Yeah, it felt good. Like nothing could stop me. Renee reached over and squeezed his shoulder. That's the spirit you need to keep. On the court, in life, everywhere. A few days later, Renee received an email from the department director. They wanted to launch a new initiative, a mentorship program for young officers, pairing them with experienced agents like her to help them understand community relationships better. The director asked if she would lead it. She read the message twice before replying. She thought of her long career, of all the cases she had worked, of the night that had changed everything. This felt different. It wasn't about punishment or discipline. It was about prevention and understanding. She wrote back simply, "I'll do it." In the following months, Renee trained small groups of officers. They sat in circles rather than rows, and she encouraged open discussion. She told stories, not dramatic ones, but human ones. She spoke about fear, empathy, and the power of presence. She noticed something changing in the room each time. Walls coming down, minds opening a little. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One day, a young officer approached her after a session. "Agent Johnson," he said quietly, "I used to think people exaggerated when they said they were scared of us. But after hearing your story, I get it. I want to do better." She smiled warmly. "That's where it starts," she said. With wanting to do better. Her son also began to speak more about what had happened. When his school invited students to share personal experiences for a community video, he volunteered. He spoke simply, saying, "What happened to me changed the way I see the world. But it also showed me that one person can make a difference. My mom showed me that." The video later spread online and people responded with kindness. His honesty touched many hearts. Renee watched the video one evening, tears forming in her eyes. She had never expected her quiet, thoughtful boy to speak so openly. "You did good," she said when he came home. "Really good," he shrugged, smiling. "Guess I learned from you." Spring came, and with it a sense of renewal. The trees on their street turned green again, and laughter returned to their home. The past was still there, but it no longer felt heavy. It had turned into something else, a reminder, a lesson, a source of strength. One weekend, Renee was invited to a televised town meeting where officials and citizens discussed progress in community policing. She hesitated as always, but went anyway. She spoke calmly about accountability and trust, about how both sides had to keep showing up even when it was hard. Her words weren't about anger, they were about hope. People listened, and when she finished, there was a gentle round of applause. Afterward, an older woman came up to her. "You gave me hope today," the woman said softly. "My grandson went through something similar. Hearing you makes me believe things can get better." Renee placed a hand on her shoulder. "They will," she said, "one step at a time." When she returned home that night, her son was waiting for her at the door. "How was it?" he asked. "It went well," she said. "I think people are starting to listen." He nodded. "Good. They should." They sat together in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background. After a while, he spoke again. "You ever think about quitting the job?" She smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember why I joined. To make a difference. And right now, maybe I can make one more than ever." He leaned back, thoughtful. "I guess that makes sense." Later that night, she stood by the window watching the streetlights glow. The same street that once held fear now felt peaceful again. A car passed slowly, and for a brief second the headlights reflected off her badge on the table. She looked at it not as a symbol of authority but of duty. It wasn't just about enforcing laws anymore. It was about protecting fairness itself. Months later, at a ceremony celebrating community achievements, Renee received a small award for her work in bridging law enforcement and local neighborhoods. She wasn't one for attention, but when she walked up to the stage, she caught sight of her son sitting proudly in the audience. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, everything made sense. The pain, the growth, the strength it took to reach that moment. When she spoke, her words were simple. "We all have a choice every day to act out of fear or to act out of understanding. I hope we keep choosing understanding." The applause that followed wasn't loud or flashy. It was heartfelt. That night, as they drove home from the event, the air was filled with quiet joy. Her son turned to her and said, "You did it, Mom." She looked at him with a gentle smile. "No," she said softly. "We did it." The house was calm when they got home. She placed the small award on a shelf beside a framed photo of the two of them at the park from years ago. The light from the lamp caught both frames, making them glow together. Before heading to bed, she looked once more at her son. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, better than okay," she smiled. "Good night, kiddo." "Good night, Mom." As the night grew quiet, Renee sat for a moment thinking of how far they had come. The fear that once defined them had turned into strength. The anger had turned into purpose, and the silence that once filled their home had turned into understanding. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. It felt like a new beginning. Life had not gone back to the way it was, but maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe it was meant to become something stronger, something wiser. And as Renee turned off the light, she whispered to herself, "This is how change begins."